Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Crouch, and this is Policy Talks. We formerly known as the Public Affairs Roundtable and various other iterations that you may have seen in the past. This is presented by Williamson, Inc., our Chamber of Commerce here in Williamson County, and it's our monthly show to visit with our state legislators early part of the year and other public officials on through the year. So we appreciate you being with us here this morning. Got a bright-eyed group here at Columbia State this morning, and in spite of the weather, it's a beautiful day outside, just a little damp and white. So we appreciate y'all being here. We do have WCTV Live this morning on Channel 3, Comcast, and WAKM 950. We're glad to have that audience with us as well. Our guests this morning, again, are our Williamson County Legislative Delegation, our Senate Majority Leader, and 23rd District State Senator Jack Johnson, our 63rd District State Representative Glenn Casta, 65th District State Representative Sam Whitson, and Brandon Ogles is due here anytime, who represents Glenn says it's time to get up, Brandon, but he should be with us here before long. We've now we're almost to the end of February, gentlemen, and the things from time to time get pretty exciting downtown, it sounds like. But tell us a little bit about the housekeeping. From what I'm reading, I don't see a lot of things going to the floor of the House or the Senate yet. Is that correct? Is it most of the work being done in committees at this time, Jack?
Yeah, it is, and that's good morning, everyone. Dave, great to be back with you. So, and that's typically the case earlier in session. All bills get filed, they get referred to the appropriate standing committee, which is the subject matter committee, and that's where most of the work is done on legislation. By the time it gets to the floor, 99 times out of 100, it's going to pass. So yeah, we're spending a lot of time in committees now, less time on the floor. As we get about a month from now, we'll be spending less time in committees and a lot of time on the floor, because everything's got to make its way through the committee first.
Right.
On the House side, we've got a subcommittee system, a full committee, and so a member will spend the first 2 or 3 weeks researching amendments, working the committee, and so a lot of the bills, I know Brandon and Sam have a very important bill in subcommittee. I think both of them cleared their subcommittee. So yes, it looks slow, but it is, the machine's moving.
Sounds like it. Sam?
We're starting.
Your committees are...
Anyway, yes, we're starting to see a pickup in our Transportation Committee and Infrastructure Subcommittee, and also in the Budget and Finance Committee sub. How many bills? We had a lot of bills to look at this year. And so as the members start working bills, they start hearing about pushback and issues, and then they start rolling their bills. So we're rolling a lot of bills to later on in the session, and that will, if we are not careful, that could really cause a problem in the pipeline later on.
Gotcha. Brandon?
Yes, sir.
You staying busy?
Hello. I am. Criminal justice is starting to get pretty busy right now. Most things are off the desk. I've still got 2 or 3 things that I'm working on the amendments to bring off. But a lot of the governor's legislation is coming through criminal justice. So those amendments have been filed. So we're starting to look at those, and some of those have been put on notice. Some will go a little bit later in session. Oh, well, yeah. Let's see. So I guess yesterday, the day before, we had a couple bills that came up, one of which was about fake news. The committee was very keyed up, and my bill, the bill that I've been working on most of the summer, was directly behind that. And sometimes you get a little vengeance taken out on you after something passes. So I had to roll my bill to the hill. The committee took out their aggression on the next 2 bills. They got inundated with questions. It got beat up pretty hard. An hour later, when everybody was tired, my bill sailed through before I even got a chance to describe it. So they gavelled it through, and we went on. So sometimes and it was because I did have a good bill, and it was well vetted, and everybody had worked on it in the committee. But sometimes, we get aggressive, or somebody gets their feelings hurt, and you you do kind of work somebody over, I would say, a little bit.
Now, does the beard, is it helpful in intimidating your other fellow legislators into doing what you want them to do, or how has that affected things?
Well, for some reason on the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, I was designated kind of the mean side of the committee, as we're doing a lot of good work to help people with mental illness and drug addiction problem, which is all great things we need to do. We're also freeing up some money to hone in and work on some problems on the other side as far as domestic violence, crimes against children and women. Yesterday I spent the better part of the afternoon at the TBI touring their lab and looking at their lab facilities. We're trying to work on those turnaround times when we submit DNA evidence, and that's something as the General Assembly allots them money. So we're trying to get some more funding to the TBI to help turn around some of the processing on the crime scenes.
Right. Now, Glenn, one of my clients made the mistake of telling me that facial hair made me look smarter. Is that why you're got a little more facial hair?
You're going to see a full beard then in about a couple of weeks.
No, nobody's accused me of that.
It is busy time for us, but I tell you who it really falls on is the legislative assistants who have to work for us. And like Amanda Conway there, you can talk to her after this and ask her what really is going on down there at the House and the Senate. They do great work. The legal staff, the governor's staff, the House and Senate staff, they're probably started early this morning and probably be working all through the weekend, reviewing these bills, make sure they're in the right format, and the clerk's office too. It takes a lot of work just to get, not so much for us to walk it through and talk, but the background is what's really where the nug work is done.
One more housekeeping question, but last month I had intended to spend most of this session on education, but it doesn't sound like a lot of the education issues are being, there's not much going on there yet. There's some big things that the governor's proposed, but I haven't heard much about them by way of committees. Jack, are you?
Well,
is there more going on?
A couple of reasons for that. There are a couple of legislative initiatives that are making their way through that I could touch on. One is the literacy program. I'll come back to that. Another is that a lot of what the governor proposed is budgetary. It's additional money, it's additional funding. The largest single contribution towards teacher pay raises in the history of the state, $117 million. That's a budget thing. That's not a bill. That's not a piece of legislation. Okay. Fully funding the BEP formula, putting $250 million into a trust fund to create recurring revenue for mental health counselors in the schools. Mm-hmm. That actually is a bill. There's a legislative component of that, but it will get very little discussion because everyone's in support of it. But the big thing is the budget. And we talk about that, and when we were here last, we had not received the governor's budget. We have it now in his initial budget proposal. So a lot of what the governor does, he does through funding, and that's in the budget, and sometimes that doesn't take legislation. Now, on the literacy initiative, this one is a big deal. And there's a lot of conversation going on about it. If a student is not reading proficiently by the third grade, they're almost doomed to fail. It's the clearest metric we have in terms of predictability or predicting success for a child. And we don't do well in the state of Tennessee. We do well in Williamson County. We don't do well as a state, right? And it's less than half of our third graders are reading proficiently at the end of the third grade. So the governor is attacking this in a big way. And when you do that, you ruffle feathers. And because, we're going to challenge our teachers, but we're also going to give them the necessary tools that they need in order to be better able to teach these kids to read. We're inconsistent across the state, and so he is challenging our higher education institutions who teach our teachers to say, you need to equip these teachers, especially early childhood education. When they get into the schools, they need to be teaching these kids to read. They need to get that done. And we're going to have testing. We're going to have accountability. I know when you say testing, it makes people nervous because we're already over-tested, and I agree with that. But you got to have results. You got to be able to know who's doing it and who's not. So early childhood literacy, big deal. I'm proud of the governor for attacking it, and you're going to be hearing more about that.
On the House side, you'll see that bill move in about 2 weeks. It is on the House side as well. There's just a lot of debate because when you move, the book, Who Moved My Cheese? When you move somebody's cheese, it makes a lot of people at a minimum suspect. But
So specifically, what does this bill do that would make a teacher uncomfortable?
It's gonna hold them accountable. It's gonna hold them accountable. If you're a first, second, third grade teacher, and your children are assessed and they're not reading proficiently, then it's not threatening, it's not attacking to our teachers. It's kind of much like we did with Governor Haslam's education reform that took us from the high 40s across the nation, according to the NAEP test, to the mid 20s. You have to be disruptive. You have to go in and change things. So specifically, think of it in two prongs, and it gets more detailed than this. We're going after the higher education. It's not going after, we're challenging, and we're going to work with our higher education institutions who teach teachers, the schools that produce our teachers, to say, what are you doing to properly equip and give these teachers the tools so that when they get in the classroom, they can teach these kids how to read. And then once you're in the classroom and you're a teacher teaching these younger kids how to read, you're going to be assessed, you're going to be evaluated, the students are, and then if your kids aren't progressing, then we're going to work with you to get you the necessary tools to make it better.
Okay. Anybody else got any to add to that? The other thing that you mentioned, Jack, is $250 million going into a mental health trust fund, education trust fund. Very little detail that I've been able to see out there about this trust fund. So that's a lot of money, What specifically does that money, what do you plan on doing with that?
It's a really innovative and novel idea that the governor came up with, and it's something we haven't done before with general fund dollars. Let me give you an example. It's very similar to what we did with Tennessee Promise under Governor Haslam. We have lottery surpluses, right? And this is lottery funds that we did with Tennessee Promise, not the mental health. I don't want to confuse people, but I'm giving you an example. With our lottery, when we created the lottery, we said there's three things you can do with the proceeds, right? You can fund scholarships, you can do capital improvements for education, and you can fund pre-K. That's it. It's in our Constitution. It's the only thing you can do with the lottery. So we do the Hope Scholarships. If any of you have, I've got a college student, and it gets the Hope Scholarship. What we also did, what Governor Haslam proposed, is we took $500 million of that lottery surplus, we put it into a trust fund because it was a surplus. This is money over and above what it takes to fund what we had already obligated. And we had much more than that, maybe $800 million surplus. We took 500 of that, put it into a trust fund, invested it, using the proceeds off of that to fund Tennessee Promise, which is the last dollar scholarships for community colleges and TCATs. We're going to do the same thing. We're in a really, really good situation as a state. We have a record surplus, both in recurring and non-recurring dollars. The challenge we sometimes have, though, is one-time money. We only spend it on one-time events, right? So what the governor says, let's take $250 million of that one-time surplus, not spend it, set it aside over here in a trust fund, invest it, use the proceeds to fund mental health counselors in our schools. It's a way to use non-recurring dollars to create recurring revenue. And we don't spend the money. You're puzzled. I mean, what part of that don't you understand?
Everything, but no, I'm slow. But so the money's just going to be invested. How's it going to be invested? I am
Through our state treasurer. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And
much like he does the Tennessee Promise Trust Fund.
Okay.
It's the same premise.
And then just the income off that trust will be used to fund more counselors.
With the intent to grow that money, we can leverage it with some private foundation money, like the Gates Foundation is very interested in this subject. We have a problem in our schools with behavioral health.
Okay.
And it's the number one thing we hear from our teachers out there. And I see Judge Guffey nodding her head about this. And so teachers' time is being taken up dealing with behavioral issues, and they're not able to teach the kids. We do a great job here in Williamson County, but across the state, we don't have enough of these counselors that can address kids that are struggling with behavioral health issues.
Okay. Judge Guffey, do you have anything to add to that? Can you?
I just think that is just stellar. I just think that's wonderful.
Hold on. Let's get you on.
Let's get that on the record.
That's the best news I've heard in a long time. That mental health is the biggest challenge that we face, not just in schools, but in our juvenile courts. And it's the least addressed. with funding. So that is huge. Thank you, Senator Johnson.
Dave, if I could add to that, an analogy. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
An analogy would be investors. So you've got clients and you build up their assets so that they live off the interest.
Right.
I hope to be
That's
there
the
someday.
objective, yes. Until weeks like this, but no. Right. Well, thank you, Judge Guffey. And there are 2 or 3 other things in the governor's, that were in the governor's State of the State address that I was curious about. The BEP program, he's proposing to, quote unquote, fully fund that. And does that affect Williamson County's education money if you fully fund the BEP?
I'm doing all the talking.
Go ahead.
I know we're ahead of you guys because it'll be 2 weeks before you all see some of this.
Well, and it's good that because Jack is actually carrying these bills, so I think it's
Right.
proper that you do explain it. But it
I
will.
just don't want to hog all the time, but
We'll
as
get to
majority
that.
leader, I'm working with the governor on all these things. So,
Right.
so fully funding the BEP formula says that we're accommodating population growth, student growth, and we're keeping the ship afloat, if you will. It does not change the fact that Williamson County gets a raw deal in the BEP formula.
Right.
Okay, it does mean that we get additional money for our student growth, not to build new schools, which we've talked about ad nauseum, but if we have a 3% increase in student population, then we will get a 3% increase in our BEP formula to fund teachers, to fund books, to fund desks, things of that nature.
Right.
But keep in mind, though, even with the BEP formula, the Williamson County Commission funds over 50 cents of every dollar to educate a child. So BEP only accounts for 45, 46, 47% of the funding to educate a Williamson County child. So yes, that 47% or slightly less than half of the budget to educate a child in Williamson County will go up, but it's still disproportionate,
Still not
if
enough.
that makes sense.
And Dave, just kind of irritate the wound, some counties in the state get 87, 88% of their money from the state of Tennessee.
The BEP formula, maybe we need to have a special show to unravel that mystery, but we'll save that for another day.
Well,
Brandon?
and I can't say as a freshman trying to touch the BEP is about like the equivalency of walking into church and rewriting the book of Matthew, because my head was spun quickly. There was no negotiation. It was basically, don't touch it. You're going to break the whole system. Jack's got some initiatives he's working on that's outside the BEP, but for now, especially with that being challenged some in court or we can't touch the BEP.
Gotcha. Now, honestly, I think there was $130 million in there for higher education, additional funding for higher education. But I understand that building number 4 here at Columbia State did not make the cut, even though we're adding a lot of funding to higher education. What do we need to do to get building number 4? Sam?
Well, we all have been working with the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and Mike Krause and his team and Chancellor Tidings, that they know our position on this, and we have worked hard. There is a cut line, and we were right below the cut line on new construction. It's not been finalized yet. We're going to continue to work that, but also what we hope next year, where we were so close this year, that will put us in a position to be there next year. And we articulated our need for this building because of the student enrollment here is just growing faster than most other community colleges. But it is a #1 topic for everybody in this delegation, and we'll continue to work on that.
Good. Talked to Dr. Lampley earlier, and as he pointed out, 2,500 or so students is the limit, as I think you put it, and we just can't have any more students until we get more room. Is that right?
That's what we're facing.
Right. Jumping off of education here for a minute, and I think, Brandon, you've had quite a bit of involvement in the criminal justice piece of the governor's proposal. His stated goal is to reduce recidivism, if I said that right. How do you do that without endangering the public? What's the objective? How are you going to, how is that looking?
Well, one of the interesting things when you look at our criminal justice system is you find when you look at the data, the longer people stay incarcerated, the more violent they become. So if you're looking at violent crimes and the crimes that really, as citizens, kind of get the hair on the back of our neck to stand up, the things that really burden us and trouble us and hurt us the most are those violent offenses, breaking into your house, abuse, crimes of sexual nature. Those, I would say, are one thing everybody can agree on that we really need to focus on and be sure we treat. Unfortunately, a large part of our resources are used up on mental health and drug addiction, which are both really diseases when you talk to the Department of Health. So our criminal justice system really needs to mirror our health department and the fact that, we need to treat these like diseases, give them treatment, recovery court. We see that once we give resources to people that commit, I would say, these lower offenses, not that drug offenses are by any means acceptable, but the way our system is right now, you could literally have the equivalent to a couple packets of Sweet and Low back there and spend 13 years in a state prison where you could really hurt somebody bad and be out in 2 to 3. So we have to look at sentencing, and we need to look at really ways to give people help. Recovery court's one of the greatest ways we're doing that, and get people off drugs, get them treatment, and get them back into society. 95% of the people are coming out. We need to be sure in the process of getting them in and out of the system, we give them resources, give them training, give them support so they can reenter society. It's not a softening on crime at all, but it is more of a providing the adequate training and support network that people can actually get work, get employed, and stand on their own 2 feet.
How does the cost compare to incarcerating someone versus putting them through a recovery court?
Jack knows these numbers real good, so I'm going to kick it back to.
Yeah, it's dramatic. To house someone in one of our state penitentiaries is around just shy of $30,000 a year. It's probably $28,000 to $29,000. And I think, don't hold me to this, but a recovery court program is going to be a third of that, probably. And keep in mind, it's not just that. It's just if someone's incarcerated and they're in prison because they're a multiple drug offense, and again, we're not talking about people dealing drugs. We're not talking about people who commit violent crimes. These are people who are addicted. These are people who have a substance abuse problem, and perhaps it's the second or third or fourth time that they've been charged and convicted with a crime. They haven't hurt anybody. They just can't break their addiction. We put them in prison. It costs the state $28,000, $29,000 a year. Put them in a drug recovery court program. That if they have kids, they can still be a parent to their kids, which they can't do when they're in prison, right? So you create a potential, foster child situation with their kids. They can work a job. In fact, they're required to work a job when they're in the recovery court program, and they're required to go through intensive rehabilitation. And by the way, they still do jail time because we want them to get a taste of it. And I think a lot of the recovery court programs, though, will let them do their jail time on the weekends so they can still work their job. So they have to do some jail time. They get some of that shock incarceration to see what they're missing by the opportunity to be in this recovery court program. But the recidivism rate for people that go through an intensive recovery court program is less than 20%. It's almost the complete inverse for people we put in jail. The recidivism rate is 80%. So it's clear, the numbers don't lie. So that's what Brandon's talking about, is we have to be smarter and free up those prison beds for the people that commit violent abuse, violent sexual abuse. And because we want to not just lock them up, we want to lock them up for a long time.
Glenn?
And I'll add, we talk about it quite a bit, but we have a recovery court, a drug court here in this county, and it's quite successful. And so we need to, as a community, need to support that financially and in every way we can, because what they produce and those that work in there, it's phenomenal.
And one last thing, Dave, I'm glad Glenn said that, because we have 95 counties in Tennessee, and I don't know the exact percentage, but it's something like half don't have a recovery court program. So if someone commits one of those drug offenses in Williamson County, Lewis, Hickman, Perry, that's 21st Judicial District for now, because we did split it up into a second judicial district, but they have an opportunity perhaps to go through that drug recovery court program. But if you're in Hancock County, or you don't have that option. And so governor's initiative is and this is just one small piece of the overall criminal justice reform, but it's something that resonates with people, is number one, all Tennesseans should have access to that type of a program if we're going to offer it. And for those that are offering it, if they have additional demand, we need to increase the capacity to make it available for more people.
Right. Moving on, the governor's made a couple of announcements recently that have attracted a lot of attention. Yesterday, he rolled out the permitless carry, I guess, a bill that I think surprised a few people. And Jack, since you're working with the governor on what he's actually proposing, tell us a little bit about that bill and what's driving it.
Sure, and of course the headline and the media will make a big issue of that one small part of this bill. This is yeah, I know it's surprising, but I'm winking at Carrie there. You do a great job, Carrie. It's not directed at you. The bill that the governor proposed fits right in with what we're just talking about. And that is, where are we directing our resources relative to crime and crime prevention? Should it be on law-abiding citizens, or should it be on people who commit crimes with guns? Now, this is an age-old debate that people have been having for decades and decades about gun control. And to be real clear about where I am on this, I think we should go after criminals, not after guns, because criminals commit crimes, guns don't. That's what the governor's doing. The enhancements that are in this bill for people who commit crimes with guns are remarkable. Mandatory 85% of your sentence if you commit a crime with a gun. This is if you commit a crime with a gun, or you steal a gun, or you steal a car that has a gun in it, we're coming after you, and we're going to lock you up for a really, really long time. That's 90% of this bill. That's 90%, and it ties in right with what we're talking about. If you're a nonviolent offender, let's do what we can to keep you out of prison, but get you rehabilitated. But if you're a bad guy, and you're going to hurt people, and you're going to commit crimes with guns, we're going to lock you up for a really, really long time. Okay, that's the general premise about criminal justice reform. Small part of this, in Tennessee, if you're walking down the street and you have a gun in your pocket, and a police officer sees the gun and comes up, says, or suspects you have a gun, says, "Hey, can I see your gun permit?" And you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, officer, I don't have a permit." And he says, "Well, he's going to write you a citation. It's a Class C misdemeanor." Okay, if you're a law-abiding citizen, if you're otherwise authorized to own a gun, it's a Class C misdemeanor. We're going to do away with that, because you shouldn't be penalized to exercise your God-given constitutional rights as afforded by the United States Constitution. If you're a law-abiding citizen, that's all we're doing. 16 states, including 4 states that border Tennessee, have this on the books. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you can be armed. You don't have to go get a permit. Now, if you've committed a crime, you're a felon, that's a totally different matter. So it's permitless carry. We've been talking about it for many years. The Senate's passed it twice. It hadn't passed the House. The governor campaigned on it and said, "I believe we should do this." And he decided this is the year to do it. So we're going to do it, and it will pass.
There's 2 sides of this, obviously, to every issue. And it seems that, okay, if I'm carrying a gun now, I'm supposed to have a permit in my pocket, just like my driver's license or whatever. If this bill passes, then I don't have to carry a permit. And if I borrowed a gun from my brother-in-law, even though I'm not trained, I'm not really qualified to be carrying a gun.
How do you define qualified, Dave? I'm going to jump in right there. The Constitution of the United States, Tennessee, says that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say not infringed if you have a permit, or you take a class, or you do training. It says it shall not be infringed. It's a fundamental premise. People compare driving a car. Well, you have to have a license to drive a car. Show me in the Constitution of the United States of America where it says you have a right to drive a car. Driving a car is a privilege. It's not a right. Exercising your God-given right to protect yourself is a fundamental right that was affirmed by our founding fathers and protected in the United States Constitution.
Okay, let me push back one more time. If a policeman stops me now, he can ask for my permit, and he knows I've been screened. He knows what he's dealing with. If we don't have to have a permit, he won't know whether I'm illegal. What do you go through the process? I'm drawing a blank, but to actually own a gun. Yeah, the NCIC check. Yeah. So there will be no way he will know then whether or not I should have that gun or not by a background check. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, but if you've been detained by an officer for some reason, that or any other reason, you've been detained, like you get pulled over or you're walking down the street and an officer detains you to question you or whatever, they're going to ask for your identification and they're going to they're going to check your record. I mean, that's what they do every time they stop you. And if you come back and you have no criminal record and you're a law-abiding citizen, thank you, Mr. Crouch, be on your way.
Fair answer. Okay. Now, the other piece of it, of all these horrible gun shootings, mass shootings and that sort of things that have happened, how many of them would have been stopped if we'd had different gun legislation?
In the vast majority of those instances, it was someone who otherwise was illegally possessing a firearm. They didn't obey the law anyway. They didn't have a permit. They didn't go through proper channels. They either stole the weapon from a loved one or it was in their household or somehow they illegally obtained that weapon. That's already against the law. Again, so we're talking about law-abiding Tennesseans here. And the last thing I'll say, if you want to look about the effectiveness of gun control, one of the cities that has the absolute strictest gun laws in the nation is the city of Chicago. And they have more murders and homicides in that city than any others, literally dozens a day in some instances. States like Vermont, the conservative bastion state of Vermont, who, by the way, their senator is Bernie Sanders, they have constitutional carry. Constitutional carry, have had it for decades.
Brandon, you're on the edge of your seat, it appears.
That's what he says.
No. I'll say that almost across the board, all Republicans strongly believe in the Second Amendment. Now, there is a little debate on the first sentence of the Second Amendment that says a well-regulated militia shall for the safety of a free state. And I messed the wording up. But that word regulated in the first sentence is where all the debate is. Everybody agrees you should have the right to bear arms and have the access to that, but you will have a little bit of debate on that word regulated in the Second Amendment and what the intent of that was. And that's why when you buy firearms, you do have background checks. But across the board, you will see support on this bill. It will be on the governor's desk almost without question. It's got wide support in the House, and I think you can see from the picture, it seems like it's all but a reality on our side.
Sam, Glenn, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Brandon from our caucus meeting reaction with the announcement. It was there's strong support in the Republican caucus for the governor's legislation. There is, I know it was interesting this morning reading the paper, the TFA, the Tennessee Firearms Association, is kind of withholding their endorsement until they see the details of this legislation. And I also agree with Brandon, it will end up on the governor's desk for signature. With that, though, you know, I trained people for 26 years to kill people and with firearms, and I know the importance of training of firearms. And if it does make it to the desk, I'm going to, and I think we will too, encourage people who elect to exercise their constitutional right to get the training, not only know how to operate and employ a firearm, but more importantly, when to use the firearm. That is the big issue that seems to get lost in this, because people got to understand, if they pull out their firearm to help others against a bad guy, and they're not identified as law enforcement, more likely they are going to get shot by the law enforcement folks. So it's important that we look and encourage people, if this legislation passed, to get the training to know when and how to employ a firearm.
There's so much else we need to get to, and let's do this. The other somewhat controversial, it looks like, thing that the governor has proposed is a family leave bill. Started to do it just with an executive order, and apparently that didn't go over well. So he's pulled it back and now working it through the legislative process. 12 weeks of paid leave for any reason. I mean, what? Anybody would love to have that.
Well, the reason he had to pull back was because it was an expenditure of funds, and whenever state taxpayer dollars are expended, that's the purview of the General Assembly. It's the way it should be. It's a good check and balance. I have deep problems with it. I adamantly oppose that government mandate on businesses, and I have real concern with that mandate taking taxpayer dollars. You know, I'm a senior citizen now. I'm making ends meet. Should I pay for someone else having a child? It's a fair debate, but as he's proposed it, I oppose it.
Okay. Gentlemen?
I think overwhelmingly the governor supports families and the blessing of having a child, and a lot of this family leave is definitely looked at as, you know, leave after a child's being born. So I think you'll see a heated debate. I think 12 weeks was very aggressive.
Now, if I understood it right, it's 1 full year for what they call postpartum. That's when you have babies, right? Help me out, somebody.
Well, and the details are what will really be negotiated and looked at. I think that's where the debate will come in, is the longevity, if there's paid leave and how much. But there is support on the House, some, and not across the board, but there is, you know, this is one of those issues that will have strong debates from both sides. And so this one's going to be interesting to watch.
We need to get into some of the things that are maybe of more interest to just Williamson County, but the other kind of big thing that the media's been kicking around a lot is the professional privilege tax cut, which I will benefit from if it comes through as proposed. Not sure how I feel about it, but the attorneys and the lobbyists and the doctors and the financial advisors, they need help. I mean, they're struggling, I'm sure. But
say it again.
There's two sides of it, and I know y'all heard this, but I think there's 191,000 people that are affected by this bill that would save $200 a year. 147,000 of them are not Tennessee residents. And so that means when somebody moves to Tennessee, the financial advisor from Texas or wherever looks and says, "Ooh, I got to pay $400 a year to keep that client because I got to be licensed in the state of Tennessee, and probably my assistant has to be licensed too. So why don't you get a broker in Tennessee when you move here?" Which is okay with us. Who's behind this? What's behind the issue, Jack?
Yeah, so this started last year. We put some money in the budget to eliminate, I don't know the exact number of professions, there's some 20 some odd professions that were subject to the professional privilege tax. We've been talking about it for a long time. So you know, this tax was put in place years and years ago, and the idea behind it was that the professions that pay the professional privilege tax don't pay sales tax, okay? When you have a client, you charge them fees, you don't have to pay sales tax or collect and remit sales tax on your fees. when you go to the doctor or you hire an attorney, you don't pay sales tax on what you pay to them. So there was a $200 professional privilege tax put in place years and years ago. During the income tax debate in 2000, 2001, when the income tax failed, but the state was in really dire financial shape, they raised the sales tax 1%, and another thing they did is they doubled the professional privilege tax from $200 to $400. So last year, we, as a legislature, put some money in the budget. It wasn't in the governor's original budget to, I think it was to around $25 million. $25 million we were able to eliminate over half of the professions that are subject to the professional privilege tax. And a good example, there's some professions in there that don't necessarily make a tremendous amount of money, like audiologist, and there's some licensed professions in there that do good work, but they're not necessarily highly paid. And so we were able to eliminate those professions, and it left us with those handful that you mentioned. The biggest is financial advisors, what you do, Dave. And you're right, the bulk of those that pay the tax are from out of state. The governor put an additional $40 million in the budget to reduce that tax $200 across the board. So everyone who pays it, in-state, out-of-state, reduce it $200. He is open to the idea, and we've come back with maybe we should try to remove more professions that affect Tennesseans, and if we're going to eliminate it for the out-of-state financial advisors, maybe they're the last ones we get to, and probably do that as well ultimately. So we'll figure out some way. We got $40 million in the budget. We could put a little bit more with that, but hopefully we'll be able to eliminate it for Tennessee doctors, lawyers, and those types of professions. Sadly, we can't say that Tennessee financial advisors don't have to pay it, but out-of-state do. That's unconstitutional. So we can't, either financial advisors either got to be in or out. There's some talk about maybe trying to give you Tennessee-based a credit on your sales tax for what you pay in professional privilege. That could be a way to make it constitutional. But we're going to figure it out. But regardless, we're going to reduce the tax or eliminate the tax on a number of professions this year.
I tell you, a tax cut that hasn't made the news that I have gotten behind, but it's cutting the franchise excise tax. This is more of a House. I know it's being pushed in the Senate, but it's getting legs in the House. And one of the few areas that we're in the middle of the pack on high taxation is the franchise excise tax on business. And the thought is if we can remove that, that'll make it even more appealing to come to the state of Tennessee, because you can come and do business and prosper, and which makes all of us prosper and grows wealth.
Right. That would be true.
Glenn, let's come back to you. You have proposed a caucus called the Suburban Legislators Caucus. Sounds like a great idea, where you join hands with all the other counties similar to Williamson County.
Yeah.
And to try to help push things through that'll benefit us. How did that get started, and what do you think that'll do for us?
Well, it actually started with Jack's idea on the fast-growing schools, and the thing that we and the suburban counties run against, we're such an extreme minority. And number two, the Rural Caucus gets a lot of things done because they're unified. They meet on a regular basis. They're together. They will go to bat for each other. And it just, as I got to looking at the lay of the land, the urban Democrats and the suburban Republicans have a lot in common: infrastructure needs, capital needs, education needs. And so we had our first meeting last month. Jack spoke, did an excellent job. It was well attended. We had Republicans and Democrats. After it was over, there were multiple members that said, we've got to get together and push this forward. So we're meeting again in next week, the 4th, and we'll have a Democrat present his bill that he has on infrastructure needs. And then a couple of weeks after that, going to intend to get Ralph Schultz from the Chamber to come and talk about the importance of suburban and urban working together. Put aside the partisanship on the economic issues, and let's help each other. So it's taken off. I hope it grows. It could be good for all of us.
Now, the governor seems to have gotten behind the idea of regional transportation districts. Is that something that dovetails with some of that?
It would, but Sam. But
Yes, and also the Greater Regional Nashville Council is also looking at a new plan to take a look at a comprehensive region-wide transportation plan with the Chamber and many players in that, and we look forward to hearing more about that and see where that one's going.
Looking to see if Kent Star waltz around, but I don't think he's here this morning.
Left in this morning.
Yes. Jack, any suggestions to these gentlemen on that idea?
What's that? The
suburban
caucus? No, it's a fabulous idea, and I applaud Glenn for having the foresight to do it, because he's right. When you think about the General Assembly, a lot of people think in terms of Republican, Democrat. That's not the way to think about it. It's rural, urban, suburban, and that's kind of the breakdown there. And as Glenn said, the rural guys are lockstep. I mean, they're really, really united. As I was campaigning, traveling the state, campaigning for a majority leader, that's one of the things I heard the most from our rural legislators, rural senators, that is. You know, if you think about, I represent one county. Dolores Gresham, as a senator, has 8 counties. And we have the same population because our districts are based on population. So what she hears, that's 8 county mayors, that's 8 school systems, that's however many city mayors, however many school boards, school superintendents. I mean, it's a totally different dynamic than we have, or even someone from an urban area has who represents just part of Nashville. So it's a great idea to just make sure those people with similar needs across the state, because if it's West Tennessee, it's Germantown, it's Collierville, it's these the cities in and around Memphis. They may still be in Shelby County, but they're suburban type areas, right outside of Memphis. In Nashville, we've got all the collar counties, and then of course in Knoxville, you've got Anderson County, Oak Ridge, you've got Farragut, you've got all these cities around those areas. So I think it's a great idea. It hadn't been done before, so very supportive.
Brandon?
Yes, and This Week in Finance, Sam and I actually rolled a bill that came from another county that was looking at sending a study to Tasser. And the wording wasn't quite right. We're going to work on it. Sam came over and put a bug in my ear, and I'd already kind of stepped in the conversation.
It was a good job.
But what a lot of other districts are seeing is the same growing pains. Rutherford County is a good example. The same growing pains that Williamson County has, as far as we've got commerce coming. We have what I'll call rapid growth to some degree, but how do we fund and how do we build our schools? So the state is going to study that and how we distribute some of the tax-based revenue inside a county, between the difference between the city and the county, and how we fund our schools that are such a high cost. So the state's going to start in the process of looking at that, bringing in some people that are really, really smart and know how to study these issues, and kind of give support to some of these communities and say, here's some recommendations and some things you might want to look at down the road.
Okay, circling back to some of the things that were a little more in the news last month, but what's the status of the Nathan Bedford Forest bust? What are we doing about Nathan these days?
So the Capitol Commission, and I am the Senate designee on the Capitol Commission, we met last week, I think, and we heard testimony. And so the Capitol Commission is effectively the entity that decides what happens in and around the Capitol. Now, certainly the General Assembly can override the Capitol Commission. When I was put on the Capitol Commission a number of years ago, the Chief of Staff of the Lieutenant Governor called up and said, hey, we need someone to serve on the Capitol Commission. It's very non-controversial. All you do is basically decide if people can have weddings in the Capitol, or school events and things like that. It's very, yeah. There's not much to it. And I said, sure, put me on there, and here we are. So the Capitol Commission met. We heard testimony. Both speakers have said that they defer to the Capitol Commission. We met 2 years ago, and we did vote on this particular issue, and the vote to move the bus failed. It was a 12-member commission. The vote failed 7-2, and I did vote against it. Happy to explain that if we need to. I've done that before. But we have a new governor now, and the Capitol Commission, the composition of it is the 3 constitutional officers, State Treasurer, Comptroller, Secretary of State, 3 of the governor's cabinet members, TDEC, General Services, and F&A, Finance and Administration, TDEC's Department of Environment Conservation, and then there are 4 citizen appointees on there that are appointed by the governor. So if you take the 3 cabinet members and then the 4 citizen appointees that the governor appoints, that's 7 votes. So if they all voted the wishes of the governor, then they could control the Capitol Commission. And those people are, most of them are new, if not all of them. And I think all of them may be new. So we're going to take the issue up again. And we met once and we heard testimony. People are very passionate on both sides. And I've heard every argument for and against why he should be removed or why he should stay and everything. People are very, very passionate about it, and I respect that. I do. So we don't have another meeting scheduled to actually vote. I would suspect that within the next few months that could happen. That's up to the chair, whether or not they convene another meeting and want to take this issue up and vote on it.
You can mention that Forrest actually fought in your backyard and my backyard, and
he sure did. Forest Crossings. That's
so
why it's named that.
we have
That had nothing to do with my vote on that, but yes, he did.
just fair disclosure there. 10-care block grant. Hadn't heard much about that in the last few weeks. Anything happening there?
Yeah, it's in the Fed's court. They're discussing it. I don't think they've gotten back to us yet, have they, Jack?
No. As you might imagine, it's a very complicated procedure. 10-care, our Bureau of 10-care submitted everything to the feds, and they're reviewing it right now, coming back with questions on it. So it's in the work.
And Dave, also in conjunction with that, the Katie Beckett legislation is up there at the federal government, still waiting final approval, but the state has moved out DIDS, the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disability, and 10-care has staffed and prepared to implement that law as soon as the feds give the go.
Right.
Oh, one other thing too, can I ask the audience a quick poll? How many here voted early and thought the process was kind of cumbersome? With the stub and the paper ballot and stuff. Nobody voted early? Okay, thank you. Okay, now how many people here thought the process could end up delaying the voting process?
Chad's working on that, right? They're trying to get rid of the stub. It's going to take some work from y'all, from what I understand.
That's true, and the Secretary of State's helping us in that regard. Hamilton County and Williamson County, the only two counties with that process where you vote, it prints a ballot, and you have to tear a stub that's not really made to be torn off the ballot, and you put it in one machine, and you put it in a box also. So we are concerned about is slowing down the voting process. The whole process was developed actually for the stub for pre-printed ballots, not the process that we have now.
Dave, I want to go back to the 10-care block grant. I think one of the greatest injustices was reporting on what the state is trying to do and what the governor's trying to do. We're simply telling the feds, we can save money not by cutting services, but by streamlining, especially the pharmacy. And then feds give us half what we save, and we're going to take care of more Tennesseans. But if you read the news articles on it, it made it portray that we're going to cut services. It was just wrong. And it was misinformation at a minimum, if not outright deceit. And so I like what the governor's proposing. You should like it because it streamlines something that is cumbersome, and then the savings, we can take care of more Tennesseans. And so it's a good thing. I hope the feds let us do it.
Okay. Kel, do we have any questions from the audience? We're doing things a little differently this year. We do have a box in the back to submitting questions that you would like to ask, because we do want you to be able to participate here, but in the interest of time, we're using written questions. So if you want one of the cards, just, Kel, will you bring some in and let them...
Or if you'd like, we can give everybody Kel's cell phone number, and you can text him directly. Yeah. I know he likes to distribute that number.
That might be a good idea, Brandon. We'll take that under review for next week or next month. Sam, back to you just for a minute. Tell us about what's going on with the Carter House. I know there's efforts to do
Yes, years ago, the state, we need a new visitor center in the Carter House. It's not really ADA compliant. We have a lot of tour groups come through there. The restroom facilities are just not ready for the amount of visitors and such. So we as the legislature allocated $3 million for a new Carter House Visitor Center. It's critically needed. The Carter House is probably the most visited state historical site in the entire state of Tennessee. It makes money for our county. And I mean, it's a great facility if you've never been. I mean, the site is a great historic site. We've done so much work around it, and the visitor center has just not kept up with what the other improvements at the site. So $3 million was allocated for a new visitor center. We thought that was enough at the time. And of course, of all the construction going on in Tennessee, the builders and the contractors have an advantage. They came in, the lowest bid was around $4.1 million, so we came up short. We as a delegation are working for a budget allocation supplemental to ask for an additional $1,000,000-something. I'm still working on the final price to see what we anticipate the contracting costs will be, but we're going to need over another $1 million to complete that project, and it's vitally needed for the economic growth of our county, because tourism, and I forget the exact numbers, I wish Ellie Chin was here, but the tourism dollars helps keep our taxes low. I think it impacts like $580 per person in our state, what the taxes that the visitors come and stay a few hours and leave.
That's good. What about the historic preservation tax credit? Where are we on that?
Again, our friend Representative Kevin Vaughn out of over in West Tennessee is carrying that legislation. Last year it had a $5 million fiscal note. We're approaching that again this year, and he's moving it through, but more than likely it will go behind the budget and discuss, and we try to help on that. I know we're getting a lot of encouragement from our local folks on that. I've been to 58 of our county courthouses in the past few months. I'm going to try to get to all 95, and you can see those counties who did not preserve their local downtown area is sad, and we just make sure that does not happen in Williamson County.
Okay, this question comes from one of our audience members here. Hopefully you'll understand it. I'm a little confused here, but does no government oversight of the block grant include the FDA?
Well, no, it doesn't have anything to do with the FDA. No, this is for the administration of TennCare, which is our Medicaid waiver program. FDA is a totally different thing. This goes through the CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And so this is just an attempt to get us greater flexibility with the federal portion of the Medicaid dollars that come in to fund our TennCare program. I don't think it has anything to do with that.
And I'll say this, and you might want to catch us afterwards. It's not that if the block grant is granted, there's no federal government oversight, which I would submit. If you look at the track history of federal government oversight on medical care, Medicaid, Medicare, you almost don't want federal government oversight. But with that said, this block grant would not delete federal oversight on those state dollars.
One of the benefits of being in the audience here is you get some face time with these guys after we adjourn. So take advantage of that and grab them, and you'll maybe can help understand some of the things going on better. Williamson County got a new judicial district all of its own, joining 9 other counties in Tennessee. Things better at home now, Jack?
I won't brag on you. Yes.
Yes, they were great anyway, but no, it's a good thing. It really is, because when the 21st Judicial District was created years and years ago, decades ago, you had Williamson, Lewis, Hickman, and Perry, and they were 4 very similar counties. They were rural, counties, roughly the same population, and so it made sense for those 4 counties to make up a judicial district. Fast forward now, the other 3, Lewis, Hickman, and Perry, are still rural, smaller population counties. And then you have Williamson County. And so when you look at the weighted caseload studies and everything, Williamson County certainly has the volume and case volume to warrant 4 full-time judges, and yes, my wife is one of those, circuit court judges, 1 DA, 1 PD, and then of course their staffs of 8 assistant DAs and assistant public defenders. And then now Lewis, Hickman, and Perry will be its own judicial district. So it's 3 rural counties that make sense, 1 judge, 1 DA, 1 PD.
Let me brag on Sam real quick on the House side.
We're out of time.
Out of time. He carried the weight.
Gotcha. Good. Gentlemen, we appreciate really having you taking time to be here so that we can understand these things better. Hope that the audience will have time to engage with you even after we adjourn. There are several other things I would have liked to have gotten to. There's probably questions you would have liked to ask, but we'll try to get to them next month. We'll be back here on the last Friday in March, And we just appreciate all the people that work so hard to make this show come together. First of all, Columbia State, and giving us this awesome facility to conduct it in. The WCTV crew, Creed Henderson, makes us really look good on TV. And Tom on WAKM makes us sound good, and we appreciate your getting us on the air there, Tom. AT&T and Vanderbilt both make a financial contribution to help pull it all together. Community Coffee and Don Klein Consulting have brought the coffee and donuts this morning. You need to get here about 7 to get any of the donuts. But and the chamber staff, led by Kel McDowell, we've got Griffin, we've got Nancy, we've got Matt Margin with us here this morning, and everybody works hard to, who'd I miss? Abby, golly, the guru of events like this. We appreciate all you all do to make this come together. Hope you'll be back next month. Look forward to having you. Thank you very much.